All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Claiborne, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Vice President of AIA Virginia. And due to the time sensitivity of this topic as it relates to access to funding, this panel discussion was really pulled together in short order over the weekend. We're all getting bombarded by COVID-19 emails, and at some point, you need to have a trusted, accurate, and concise source that you can depend on. And it's my hope that AIA Virginia is just that for you. In addition, there are various resources pages that are out there. When you click on them, there's about 150 additional links that you have to wade through. It can be overwhelming, it can be frustrating, it can be scary, but essentially, if you believe you should be applying for funding, you have to do that. And so our thought that today is that this is a concise conversation to help you navigate through those resources. And so welcome to today's panel discussion titled Navigating Concisely Through the CARES Act. This program is put together with our partners at O'Hagan Meyer, attorneys and advisors. Hobie Andrews, who many of you know is a household name in Virginia's architecture and design industry. And he was gracious enough to work with me over the weekend to pull this off. O'Hagan Meyer has been one of my main trusted resources as I've had to navigate our organization through COVID-19. So much so that I've shared their guidance documents with my counterparts from around the US and have received a number of notes of praise and gratitude. Also want to thank Village Bank and Virginia Association of Community Banks who are participating on this call today as of 9 o'clock last night. And you have to understand, for banks, this is one of the most intense times that you could imagine right now, processing thousands of loan applications. So to have them here today is a real honor, and we're ever so grateful to have them for this 1 hour. Before we go further, I want to set the stage of maybe some house rules before I introduce our moderator. This program is being recorded and will be hosted on the AIA Virginia COVID-19 resource page. For those that attend the program in its entirety, you should receive 1 CEU credit from the AIA. Due to the short timetable of organizing and deploying this program, we're still awaiting approval for that. When you entered the Zoom meeting, your microphone was muted as the default setting, so please do leave your microphone muted during the conversation, and we will certainly have ample time for Q&A as this will be an interactive discussion. As the conversation progresses, I'd ask that you just please submit your questions at any time in the chat box. And you'll see that dialog box down in your toolbar as a chat icon there. Hopefully that's all clear. If you have any questions, again, please use that chat box and we'll make sure that we address them throughout the presentation. And now is my opportunity to introduce our famed moderator, Mr. Charlie Meyer. Charlie is the co-founder of the firm, O'Hagan Meyer. His practice focuses on litigation and counseling, and he represents employers in a wide variety of employment litigation matters, including defense of wrongful discharge claims, breach of employment contracts, and restrictive covenants. Also including disability discrimination claims under the ADA and a host of other things. In addition to representing clients on labor and employment matters, his practice includes representing clients on professional liability, D&O, commercial, product liability, and other civil actions. Charlie has successfully tried more than 60 jury trials and numerous bench trials in state and federal court. He also regularly represents employers before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Virginia Employment Commission, and has successfully represented clients before the Virginia Supreme Court and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Charlie is a famous man riding the waves high of being the immediate past chair of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. If you remember, in 2019, Virginia was ranked the #1 state to do business. So we're honored and privileged to have you here, my friend Charlie, and I'll turn the floor to you.
Well, Corey, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. And it's interesting thinking about where we were this time last year. Virginia was ranked by MSNBC the #1 state to do business. And with the Chamber of Commerce, it was just high times, and you know, what a transition it's been. But we're all going to get through this. And part of what we want to talk about is the specific relief, obviously, with the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. And I also appreciate your comments about my partner, Hobie Andrews, who heads up our firm's A&E practice. A number of you on this call know Hobie. He's represented Virginia AIA for years. I understand he's an honorary member of AIA Virginia, and he's just a fantastic resource for all of you to use. What I'd like to do at this point is have the panelists introduce themselves before I give just a quick snapshot overview of the CARES Act. So starting with Joan McKenna, my partner.
Hello, I'm Joan McKenna. I'm a partner with Charlie in O'Hagan Meyer's Richmond office. I've been practicing employment defense work for about 20 years. And I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you, Joan. Woody Lay, another partner of mine.
Hello, I'm Woody Lay. I'm the managing partner of O'Hagan Meyer's Charlotte, North Carolina office, but started my career in Virginia and licensed in Virginia, undergrad and law school in the state of Virginia. So glad to be participating.
Thank you, Woody. Max Moorhead, Executive Vice President of Commercial Lending for Village Bank. Max.
Yeah, good afternoon and pleasure being here, and hopefully I can add something that will be useful to you all. Village Bank is a community bank based in Midlothian, Virginia, but we cover the Central Virginia area, and I've been in commercial banking about 33 years.
Well, Max, thank you for being with us, and as Corey said, I know how busy you and Steve are at this time. Last but not least, Steve Yackel, President and CEO of the Virginia Association of Community Banks. Steve.
Thanks, Charlie. So the Virginia Association of Community Banks has been around since 1977. We, as the number of banks shrink, we still retain 85% member penetration, which is pretty good. And I do a variety of things for them, except that from Thursday night until this
Owen,
I have
can you come here for a second?
Hello.
And Melissa, just
Melissa.
to interrupt, Melissa, you are not on mute because we just heard you asking someone to join you. So if everyone on the phone can just keep on mute, that'd be a huge help.
So I'm buried in the salt mines trying to figure out what the PPP actually means, and help desk for banks and lobbying members of Congress, and hoping we can get the system to work for everybody. So it's a pleasure to be here. Hope I can add some color.
Thank you, Steve. Just real quick, a little overview on the CARES Act, signed into law back on March 27, not that long ago, to provide approximately $2 trillion in assistance to individuals and businesses trying to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you think about it broadly, this legislation tries to provide relief in two buckets. First, for individuals, and that's in the form of a heightened unemployment benefit. This is important for all of you with your practices to understand for your workforce, the relief for individual employees in the form of enhanced federal unemployment. And then second, the relief for the businesses. With respect to the unemployment component, there are two titles that govern that. The entire act is 5 titles, but the 2 titles in question basically provide 13 additional weeks of federal unemployment assistance over and above the 26 weeks that you get here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So if you tack on 26 weeks, which is 6 months, another 13 weeks, that's 39 weeks of unemployment for your employees in the event of a layoff or furlough. That's important for you all to remember. If you're furloughed or you're part-time, your hours are reduced, you can still apply for part-time unemployment with the Virginia Employment Commission and are eligible for these heightened benefits. Another factor that, just to bear in mind on that front, is that the amount in question is significantly higher than anything that the Virginia Employment Commission has provided before in terms of unemployment benefit. In the past, it was capped out at $378 a week. It's now $600 a week under the new federal CARES Act legislation. So that's a huge component. The focus of our conversation today, though, is the second part of CARES, which is the bigger part, and that's the relief for businesses. And it's in 2 forms. It's the Paycheck Protection Program with its forgivable loan feature, and the EIDL loan program, or Economic and Injury Disaster Loans. And the Paycheck Protection Program, just in a nutshell, it applies to all of you with fewer than 500 employees to apply for a PPP loan through an SBA-approved lender. That's why we've got Max and Steve on the phone to navigate that process for us for 2.5 months of average monthly payroll. And there's a look-back period. The aggregate is again capped, as everyone knows, at $10 million. That's the Paycheck Protection Program, has some very unique features particularly with respect to forgiveness, which I know everyone's interested in. The other business relief, the EIDL program, does allow for loans. They're capped out at a smaller amount. It doesn't go up to 10 million, it goes up to 2 million in loans for small businesses following a statewide economic injury declaration. And Joan and Max and Steve will be talking more about that in a moment. Quick nutshell before we get on to some of the substance of both the Paycheck Program and the EIDL. And that's to recall that a week before this was enacted, we had something called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, widely known as the Family First Act. And that impacts all of you as well. This seminar is not about that, but I will just highlight for you, it has two different features which could impact your workforce. One is a paid sick leave component for 2 weeks up to 80 hours for paid sick leave if the employee is qualified because they're quarantined. And there's a unique definition of that, what that entails, or they have COVID-related symptoms or actually are diagnosed. That's 2 weeks of paid leave capped at $511 a day for a maximum of $5,110. The other component is the other part, which is the family leave component for childcare leave, which is partial paid. It's capped out at $200 a day for 10 additional weeks because obviously everyone in Virginia knows that the schools have been closed for the duration of the semester through June. And so it impacts those of you who have children at home and or were reliant on childcare. Daycare centers are closed as well, just like schools. So there's a whole other set of relief there that's just important to bear in mind that we're happy to follow up with. But in the meantime, let's really turn our focus on the two business relief packages with the CARES Act and start with this PPP loan program. And so let me start right now and maybe ask you, Woody, if you could talk about what size architectural firm can apply for a PPP loan, and can you just be a solo practitioner and apply for this loan?
Thanks, Charlie. Sure. It is aimed at small businesses, but interestingly, they define it in the CARES Act as any employer with 500 or fewer employees. And so it's tremendously broad. Most of us don't think of an employer with 250 to 500 employees to be a small business. But any business with less than 500 employees can apply. And yes, if you're a sole proprietor, self-employed, or an independent contractor, you can apply as well. So you can be just one person. Now, for sole proprietors and self-employed and independent contractors, you're going to have to provide some additional documentation. You're going to have to establish a payroll or a 1099 that you've got that you can show what you were paid, or some payroll tax filings. The lenders are going to ask you for some documentation to confirm that you are an operating entity and that you've got income coming in, because it is the Payroll Protection Program. It can be your own. It can be your own compensation, but there's caps on that. But you're going to have to provide some documentation. You're also going to have to certify that you've been in business since February 15th, 2020, had employees, and that the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operation of the applicant, and that you'll use the proceeds from the PPP loan for the purposes provided in the Act. And so that's the basic eligibility requirements to be able to seek a loan, Charlie.
So the number one question people probably have is, when can they start to apply?
So the dates in the guidance by the Treasury, and Steve might be able to add a little, and Matt will be able to add a little to this. So the dates in the guidance by the Treasury opened the portal or opened the window this past Friday, April the 3rd. I know very few, I'm not sure I know any lenders who actually opened a portal on Friday. There were some that opened them up over the weekend. A larger number opened them yesterday on Monday, but there are some, I've seen one from a lender who's not opening it until tomorrow, but it's April the 3rd for small businesses and sole proprietors. It's April the 10th for independent contractors, so they make you wait another week, or self-employed individuals. I mean, the key that I've found, and again, I'm an attorney advising clients, the key I've found is for those seeking the loans to contact their banker with whom they've got an established lending relationship, so that they've already done some type of credit check on you. And that can be a credit card relationship, but a lending relationship. I've not heard of somebody who's just been able to call a bank and start this process. But Steve and Max, maybe you can add something on that. The ability to get the loan ends June 30th, 2020. So it's open until June 30th, 2020 to be able to apply. Thank you, Woody. Steve, this kind of does dovetail with what Woody was saying in terms of, it says SBA approved lenders. So who are approved lenders, and, how does our audience know who to reach out to?
Well, thanks, Charlie. Of course, the easy answer would be everybody, but let me put a little color around that. Maybe a month ago, the SBA had 1,700 approved lenders nationwide out of 11,000 financial institutions, banks, credit unions, and now some fintechs. So part of the challenge with the process is developing an application and access point for upwards of 11,000 financial institutions. But I have not heard of one bank that is not engaged in the program. I can't speak for credit unions, but in terms of the banks that we know, I do know that Wells Fargo is getting a limit based on regulatory. But I would say I'm not aware of any bank that's not taking that. Okay. And Steve, I'm glad, just prior to this call, we were chatting briefly about how this is such a fluid situation and it keeps changing. So I should have said that from the outset. You may hear some particular information today which could change because of new guidance coming out. Steve, you want to give an example? There was new guidance that came out at midnight, I understand. Share a little bit about that with our audience. I have a stopwatch laying in front of me, and I'm going to try to stop at a minute here. And also, my disclaimer is that what I say may at some point sound like a little bit of a complaint, but these are uncharted waters, and we just have to take a step back. Any of you that have been involved with regulation, just the word tends to slow down your thought process. So think of any regulation. Somebody has a good idea, working group gets together, regulation is contemplated, stakeholders come on board, 60 to 90-day comment period, all that sort of thing. So the economy fell off the ledge about 3 weeks ago, and Congress stood a bill up in little or no time. And, to their great credit, Treasury and the SBA created this program pretty quickly. We would have appreciated if it would have been completely created before they rolled it out. And we would have appreciated if our friendly Secretary of the Treasury would not have said, you can leave the bank with your money the day you apply. But other than that, we're building this plane as it flies, and it's not going too bad. There's been some of the forms have changed 3 times. Guidance that came out at last night at midnight reversed guidance that had come out Sunday night around midnight. The bottom line, though, Charlie, we want to get everybody in this process is focused on getting money into the hands of the people who need it. I joked previously that since we stopped caring about the federal debt and the federal deficit, it's even more clear that whether it's funding for the program going forward, there's nobody that's fails to recognize the seriousness of the problem or the desire that we all have to be part of the solution.
Thank you for that update. It's an important caveat that things do change, so people will keep everyone posted with new regs and guidance. Max, people need to know, what do they have to submit? So what actual types of documents and information do our members need to gather and submit to the appropriate bank?
That is a great question, because as Steve just said, the program rolled out and they didn't really tell us what to do other than the loan amount is based on 2.5 times the annual monthly average of your payroll cost. Now, they didn't give us any more guidance beyond that. So I think the simple answer to that question, and I'll get into some details about what Village does, but the simple answer is whatever your bank is asking for, provide that, because we're all doing it a little bit differently due to the lack of guidance up front. I would, if your bank be as specific, if they ask for a specific document, give it to them. If they ask for some specific information, give that to them, because we did start processing applications on Friday, and Friday was every day has been chaotic, but Friday was especially chaotic. We worked 15 hours Friday, we worked 15 hours Saturday, 15 hours Sunday, 16 hours yesterday. So, and part of that is just getting all the documentation, and every day we've changed a little bit, trying to improve the process, make us more efficient, and be very specific about what we ask from our customers to submit. So your bank, I can assure you, they are not working the prototypical banker's hours now. They're out there doing whatever they can do to be part of the solution to keep people employed on your staff. Now, as far as the specific documentation Village is asking for, and there's a reason for all this, and I'll try to get into some detail, but forms keep on changing. So go to the Treasury Department website, and you can get it from the SBA website too, but the most recent application out there, and the date on the bottom of that is 4/20 in the left-hand corner, because I think that's the 4th version maybe of the application. We're asking for page 1 of your 2018 or 19 tax return. And what that tells us is we get the name of your business, we get the date you went into business or you were incorporated, and that's important to establish that you're eligible. We get your EIN number, and we also, for the most part, can get your NAICS code off of that, which is, again, part of the SBA requirement. And getting all that at one piece of paper is really powerful, and it can make us very, very efficient. If you're a sole proprietor, the law states this is based off 2019 earnings. So we have to have your 2019 tax return. So if you haven't filed it yet, and there you should have a Schedule C on that. So you need to get filed quickly, because we can't use 18. It's 19's numbers that we need to work around. We will calculate the loan amount, but the methodology is take your average monthly payroll cost over 2019, multiply that times 2.5, and that's the loan that you're eligible for. How we're establishing what your payroll costs are, and this is, again, to be very efficient and to be as accurate as we can, and to use some information that you've already filed. We're using your 2019 940 annual report to come up.
Hey, Max, you just cut out. Can you say that again, that last piece? You just cut out.
Okay. We're using the 2019 940 annual tax filing report. That should give us your dollar compensation as well as your fringe benefits, so we can go do our calculation. people that are excluded, or you're capped, you're not excluded, sorry for saying that, but anybody that's paid over $100,000, the part of the compensation above $100,000 is excluded from the calculation. And then we want to get, we need copies of your driver's license, and then the SBA form. Again, they got it out there very quickly and did the best they can, but some of the fields don't always populate. So just make sure that when you're applying, what's your ownership percentage in the business, and there's a spot on the SBA form for that. Your Social Security number, and then they also want your home address. It can't be your business address. It should be your home address. And then most banks, if you've applied for a loan or even open up a deposit account now, there's some customer identification information that you'll need to provide as well, which is anybody that owns 25% or more of the business, we need to have a copy of their driver's license. Anybody that's going to sign the note document on behalf of the company, Social Security number for anybody that's going to sign that maybe is not an owner of the company. Depending on how you're incorporated or established, articles of organization and operating agreement, or articles of incorporation and bylaws. And if we get a clean package like this, we can pretty much go from picking it up, printing off everything, and we've tried to limit it to where it's maybe 10, 12 pieces of paper, do some quick underwriting, and then we get it submitted into the SBA system. So start to finish, if it's a clean package, it takes us about 30 minutes. And I've said a lot there, so.
Well, that's very helpful, Max. And one question that did pop up just before you started in your explanation was, it sounds like not all the banks are following the same uniform process. So if your local bank, the bank that you're applying to, is asking for something else, you're just saying your recommendation would be?
Say yes and jump through as many hurdles as you have to get it to them, because that's how they're going to underwrite it, and you help them speed up the process, be more efficient, and once they work on yours, they can get to the next one to try to get those funds out as quickly as we can.
Okay. Now, are there any kind of typical requirements for a loan application that are being waived here that you could just kind of highlight for the audience?
This is it's kind of hard to call it a loan. I mean, you do sign a note on behalf of the company. There's a borrowing resolution. Then there's this beneficial ownership piece, which gets into who owns how much of your company, and that's it. There's no personal guarantee. There's no collateral pledged. There's no financial analysis done other than we, the bank, have to make our own independent evaluation that what you've applied for, you've provided us documentation that we can support it. So, and after 8 weeks, we haven't found out exactly what we need to do, but you're going to be eligible to have this loan forgiven if you've spent the money on 4 specific areas. And those are payroll costs, including benefits. If you have a mortgage that your business operates out of, the interest that you paid your mortgage, and this is over the next 8 weeks, from the time you're approved, and the next 8 weeks, this is where you can get that loan forgiveness. If you're renting your space, rent for that period can be included in the forgiveness. And utilities, water, electricity, gas, things such as that. So it really, if you use it for the purposes intended, and that's to keep your folks on the payroll, up to 100% of the loan can be forgiven. So it's a loan, but it's also more of keeping people coming to work, keeping your key people. If when we do get ramped back up, you're not going to have to go out and find new people, because I think what will happen is people will go find something else to do, or you may not be able to get them back in. So it's a loan, but outside of a note, you don't have to do a whole lot.
Okay. But in terms of that forgiveness part, Max, that form hasn't come out yet because that's the next question. You first apply for the loan, but then you want to make sure you're applying for the loan to be forgiven. They have not produced that form yet, correct?
Correct. We know what categories of expenses can be included in that forgiveness calculation. They just haven't told us exactly what we need to collect to document that forgiveness aspect of it. And the other good thing about if you've ever had a loan and it's been forgiven, that is a taxable event. You'll have to pay income tax on what was forgiven. In this situation, it is not a taxable event. That was addressed in the law that whatever is forgiven under the PPP loan program is not taxable.
Okay. Thank you, Max. Steve, and then maybe Woody too, you can chime in on this one, but I think Max has covered the amount of funding, but just to reinforce, how much can a firm receive from a PPP loan, and more specifically, what's the interest rate? Is it a fixed rate? Is it a variable rate? And if you do get a PPP loan, then what expenditures are allowed and what are not allowed?
I would just say briefly, it's a 75, 25, 75% must be payroll expenses like those that Max listed, and the other 25 could be non-payroll expenses, but still in the list that Max provided.
Okay. Woody, anything you want to share on with respect to that question? Interest rate and what expenditures are allowed and not allowed?
Yeah, just so there's no confusion on what the 2.5 times the amount of the loan that you can get. What you can include in payroll costs are salary, wages, commissions, or similar compensation, vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave amounts, any amount you're paying for severance, your group healthcare benefits, including insurance premiums, and retirement benefits, including your 401k. And I saw one of the questions that popped up was what additional, and your state and local income tax. That's what's included in payroll costs. And so generally for employers, it is taking your payroll, backing out your federal taxes, and there's varying ways that the lenders have calculated what you can back out from your federal taxes. And so just follow whatever your lender suggests. Also, for anybody who's making more than $100,000 that's in your payroll, it's capped. You can only take up to $100,000. And then if you've had employees who've gone out under the Family First Leave Act and you've gotten tax credits for that, you have to back that out. So that's what's on the amount that's the payroll cost. That's the 2.5 times when they either look back a year or you take the prior year amounts. In terms of what you can spend it on, it is those items plus interest on your mortgage or obligations, and the mortgage had to be in place by February 15th. Rent on a lease that had to be in place by February 15th, and utilities and the service began before February 15th are the big items. He said 75% has to be spent on payroll, 25% can be spent on payroll costs, 25% can be spent on those other items.
Okay.
And I would, if I could add, if there's interest in more information about the $100,000 cap, there was a question and answer in last night's midnight guidance that I'd be glad to share about. But if it's not interesting, it's not a problem.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. Going back to the loan forgiveness part. Okay, we don't have the form yet, but Woody or Joan, can the entire loan theoretically be forgiven?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yes, the entire loan can be forgiven. So the way the forgiveness works is they look at the 8-week time period after you got the loan, and there'll be a process for you to submit the documentation on what your payroll costs were and what your other expenses were, and that can that can take the whole amount of the loan. Again, 75% has to be payroll, 25% other expenses that can't exceed the amount of the loan. Joan will talk about later. If you've got what they call an EIDL loan, then that complicates the issue. And there's also requirements on maintaining your payroll at certain levels and maintaining the number of employees that you have at certain levels.
So on that issue, Joan, what if someone's firm has already had layoffs or furloughs, let people go? And I see one of the questions already is if the firm cuts back hours for employees, would they still qualify for the loan forgiveness? So how does that work?
Thanks, Charlie. That would be, the statute provides that you may, if you reinstate any employees that you have furloughed or laid off prior to June 30th, then you can receive forgiveness of the loan with respect to the amount of the loan that you use toward payroll expenses. So essentially, you're going to be penalized for decreasing headcount or compensation on the forgiveness end of the loan. But the mere fact that you've already had to go ahead and reduce your workforce due to the unusual economic circumstances we are facing will not preclude you from taking advantage of this PPP opportunity as long as you reinstate folks. And I think Woody probably has more information on the quotient of what percentage you can get reimbursed for.
Yeah, Charlie. Just to add, I hear more color to that. So the ratio, so your forgiveness, so let's say that you can expend everything 100% through the payroll that you've got in the 8 weeks afterwards, but you've got one less employee or 10 less employees that you did in earlier this year. Then what the way the program sets up is it looks at a ratio and reduces your forgiveness by the number of employees that you have fewer as compared to either January 1 to February 29th of this year, the average number of full-time equivalent employees, or the same period last year, which is February 15th to June 30th. And it makes there's no exception for if somebody resigns, somebody quits, you fire somebody for cause, you have to, to correct that, you're going to have to go out and rehire somebody. So there's that ratio. You also cannot reduce the pay of any employee below 25% of what they were making in their last full quarter of employment, which is most likely first quarter of 2020 or the fourth quarter of 2019. And it's by employee. And so you can't reduce it by employee. If you do, then it aggregates those employees. Anybody annualizing $100,000 or more in the last year is excluded from that. So don't have to worry about people making $100,000 or more. It's people making less than $100,000 or more.
Thank you, Woody. That's helpful. We've got a few questions from the audience I want to kind of walk through quickly before we head to the EIDL. So it looks like one question is, after submitting the documentation, how long should it take for the application to be processed? Is there a time frame guideline? Steve or Max, you may know more than anyone else on this panel.
We have been completely overwhelmed. We probably have a backlog of what we know of probably 300, whether they're existing customers or businesses that are in the Richmond area that aren't Village Bank customers yet. But as far as when you give the lender your application and the complete package, depending on how automated they are, do you just do it electronically? We don't have all of that some of the larger institutions have, but it should be a pretty quick process. Once the lender gets it figured out, it shouldn't take any more than an hour or so to get it processed. And the SBA, as soon as you get in their system accurately, it immediately gives you a loan number and says you've been funded for whatever amount of the loan that has been applied for. So getting the answer back from the SBA once you get into their system is very quick. It's instantaneous.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question, which is, what does it mean being in business since February 15, 2020? So if the business held a federal tax ID number and incorporation papers prior to February 15, 2020, but didn't yet have its state business license, does that count? I mean, we're talking about businesses that may have formed right around that time frame. Do we have any guidance on that? Woody, this may be where good lawyering comes into play. We incorporated before February 15, 2020. We have a federal tax ID number, but we just don't have our state license issued yet by the SEC.
I would think if you've got your tax ID number, that you can say you were operating by February 15, 2020.
Yeah. I do think they're looking for the opportunity to provide these loans so that, you can get the relief that you need to stay viable and in business.
Hey, Charlie, let me take one of the other questions that popped up. One of the other questions was, are 1099 subcontractors, independent contractors included in the calculation? The interim rule that the Treasury Department has put out, and they've clarified that, is that no, they're not. They're not in your employee calculation either for the amount that you can obtain or for what you can pay for in the 8 weeks following. The reason being is they can seek their own PPP loans, and so they're excluded.
Okay. Here's another timing question that surfaced from someone in the audience, and that is, what if you have not completed your 2019 taxes? This practice had to file an extension. So what impact does that have on applying for the PPP loan? You've sought an extension, you haven't paid your taxes. How does that impact it, if at all?
I'll take a stab at that. This is Max. I think the only time it impacts is if you're a sole proprietor and you're filing that Schedule C, because it is based on 2019 compensation. If you're incorporated or an LLC, I don't think it doesn't really matter. We just need to have, however your lender is going to calculate it, what were those eligible payroll costs in 2019. So you can establish that without having to have filed your corporate tax return.
Okay. Hey, Max and Steve, here's a question which you might be able to provide some guidance on. And the question is, can you provide advice for the audience for tracking the loan uses for easier provability at the end of the 8-week process? So we're into it, we got the loan, and now we're about to submit this loan forgiveness document. What are some of the uses that you would recommend for the audience that they're using it so that they can prove their case for loan forgiveness?
All of the eligible payroll costs, if you're providing health care and you're paying the premiums, these are employer paid premiums that the employee is paying, that gets subtracted from the total. But all of those costs, your total payroll, and I've learned more about payroll the last 4 days than I thought that I could ever possibly understand. But there are these payroll reports, payroll registers. Keep that. Invoices for health care, if you're contributing to some sort of retirement plan, keep that as well, or any of those other eligible costs. As far as if you're making your rent payment, keep copies of the canceled check, and I would do the same for utilities, and maybe make a copy of your utility bill and staple the canceled check to it, and that way there's a nice clean audit trail. So anything that you're going to claim, some piece of written documentation that's going to be easy for your bank to understand, because what I tell borrowers is a year from now, if some examiner comes in and asks, well, why did you do this? It needs to be very plain, because I'm certainly not going to remember if it was a complicated process. So the real specific, clear documentation, cancel check, those payroll reports, I think that all of those will be very helpful when it comes time to establishing and accounting for the loan forgiveness.
What about, would you recommend setting up a separate checking account for all of these payroll-related expenses for the next 8 weeks?
I think that's a great idea.
We hear it as
I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, we hear about it as a best practice. I don't know that every bank does it, but I do know that some are doing it, and it seems like a really good idea.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see, I have a couple more questions here. One strategy that a member is considering is reducing our weekly hours to extend the PPP resource for a longer period. But does the 8-week audit require us to use the loan for full paychecks? As opposed to reduced paychecks. You understand, Woody?
Yeah, I'll take this one, and then take that next question. That's the PPP EIDL, and that'll feed into section. But so on the 8 weeks, so reducing the hours. So what you got to keep in mind is when they look at when you submit the documentation to get the forgiveness of the PPP, then you will have gotten a loan on 2.5 times your payroll. And so if you reduce your payroll in those in those 8 weeks following receipt of the loan by reducing hours, then you're not going to have the payroll to offset the full amount of the loan, which isn't the worst case scenario. Anything that's left on the loan gets rolled over into a 2-year loan. It doesn't get rolled over. It just continues as a 2-year loan at a 1% interest rate. So you can make that calculation and decide what you want to do, but it will reduce your forgiveness to be able to, if you structure it like that. Okay.
And just on this issue of loan forgiveness, does actual revenue realized come into the equation at all?
No.
It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter.
Right. Okay. Now, there are a bunch of great questions, but the next one from the audience really hits on the EIDL. So I wanted to get Joan to provide an overview on that. And the question is, can we apply for both the PPP and the EIDL loan? And kind of as you talk about that, Joan and Woody, can you just kind of give a little bit of a background on what the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is?
Hi, thanks, Charlie. This is Joan. I'll take that. The EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, actually has existed for quite some time with the Small Business Administration. There has been, for obvious reasons, renewed interest and revitalization of that program at this time. And the CARES Act actually made further modifications to the loan process that makes it a little bit easier for lenders to qualify for that loan. What the EIDL loans are is it is a loan for operating expenses. Well, in order to qualify for that loan, many of the criteria for eligibility are overlap with the PPP. That is, you must have fewer than 500 employees. You can be a sole proprietor. ESOPs, tribal small businesses, nonprofits, anybody with fewer than 500 employees is eligible in theory for the EIDL. The application process is directly with the SBA, so you are not working with a bank on that process. The one big caveat, and to circle back to the question that Charlie asked a minute ago, is we are still trying to figure out how this works, is that the Treasury guidance that came out a little bit ago on the PPP loans indicates that if you've already qualified and obtained an EIDL loan through the SBA, and you're also seeking a PPP loan, you must refinance your EIDL as part of the PPP program. Now that's better for you anyway, because if you obtain a loan through the EIDL program, that loan is paid back. First of all, it's not forgivable. Secondly, the interest rate is 3.75%. The length of repayment varies depending on your ability to repay. That will be determined by the SBA, but obviously it would be better for you to have the loan forgiven than have to repay it. So, I mean, that's the short answer to the question, can you get both an EIDL and a PPP? Yes, you absolutely can. But the PPP provisions also say you cannot use any other, you can't use the EIDL proceeds for the same purposes that you're using the PPP proceeds, which again is a little bit complicated. The Payroll Protection Program proceeds are pretty narrowly tailored to trying to keep people on your payroll. The emergency economic disaster loans are for any substantive, any operating expenses that you may experience as a business that you're unable to pay because of the economic downturn and the consequent hardship that your business has suffered. But in terms of the interaction between those two loans, that still sort of remains to be seen, as to how it's actually going to work. You can do it. I would consult with either directly with the SBA or with your lender about, and Steve and Max, I don't know if you guys have had any experience yet with this, people coming to you who already have an EIDL loan, but it's an open question.
Mm-hmm. Steve or Max, any experience with existing customers who've got an EIDL loan now seeking a PPP loan and how to navigate that?
We really have not had anybody apply that already has the EIDL loan apply for the PP loan. So I really don't know the answer to that, but it does specifically state if you're gaining benefit under one, you can't have the same benefit under the other. And we talked to the Richmond office SBA quite a bit, and they said last week that it was taking 8 to 14 days to process the EIDL loans. Now, I'm not sure if that's 8 business days or 8 or 14 calendar type days, but it's a little bit longer process. Okay.
So EIDL is a longer process, it's not forgivable, and it's a higher interest rate. So your recommendation would be?
Well, this is Joan. I think I just need to add the advance part of the EIDL. If for some reason you're not, if you apply through the SBA for an economic injury disaster loan, you are also qualified and may seek a $10,000 advance on that loan, which oddly enough, you don't have to accept you may be approved for the SBA EIDL loan and choose not to accept that because you're going to pursue the PPP, and you still get the $10,000 grant. I have had one client that I spoke to who said he spoke to the SBA. They told him the $10,000 would be in his bank account in 2 to 3 business days. So it's really quick money. The only, most of the guidance we're seeing says that, there are criteria for what you have to use that money for, which again is largely the same as what the EIDL is used for generally, and tracks the PPP money. But the one quirk with all this is that, or one more, is that there's some question as to whether or not, if you've gotten that EIDL advance of $10,000, whether that is taken off the top of the forgiveness of your PPL loan. So, and then we are still trying to figure out how that works.
Hey, Charlie, this is Woody. Two other points on that. The EIDL loan program is open through the end of the year. And so assuming there's funding, this type of loan can be sought after your PPP later. You can ultimately apply for both of them. You can apply for both of them. As Max said, you just can't use the money for the same thing. But that doesn't mean that you can't use an EIDL loan ever for payroll purposes. It means you can't use it for the same payroll that you're also using the PPP loan. So you could use the PPP loan for payroll in April or May, and use the EIDL for payroll in June or July and be okay.
So you can apply for your EIDL loan after the PPP deadline ends on June 30.
Assuming they still have money left.
And there may be a $10,000 forgivable grant portion of the EIDL loan, whether you go forward with that loan or not. Is that right, Joan?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So timing is important. It sounds like PPP is a primary and EIDL might be a backup with that additional $10,000 forgivable portion. For Max and Steve, let's go back to the issue of documentation. What do you need to produce to get the EIDL loan later? So say we've gone through the PPP process. Now what do we have to produce for the EIDL loan?
Actually, this is Joan. Because the EIDL loans go through the SBA, banks are not involved. So the documentation requirements are set forth by the SBA. And
Okay.
what the SBA is going to require is going to be the SBA loan application itself. And there is a link on the SBA website to apply for these loans and for the advance. You're going to need to fill out the SBA loan application, a tax information authorization form that allows the IRS to provide your company's financial information to the SBA, complete copies of the most recent federal income tax return that you filed on behalf of the business, a schedule of liabilities, a personal financial statement, and they may seek additional information on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
And
So
just one other piece of information is that the loan is secured by, in the excess of $200,000. If you borrow more than $200,000, the SBA will take a security interest in your business as collateral on the loan.
Okay. So all of that documentation requirement is on the SBA website. If someone were to reach out to Max and his bank, Max, you all wouldn't be processing those EIDL loans directly, correct?
Correct. You go straight through the SBA. I believe they have a application portal right on their website, and you go directly for them, and it does go through the full financial analysis, underwriting, and it's going to be structured very much like a typical loan at that point, but the bank is not involved.
Okay.
And this is Joan again. One other difference that historically has occurred with the EIDL loan is that under the CARES Act, an applicant for such a loan need not demonstrate. In the past, they would have to demonstrate that no other sources of funds are available to them to get these monies. That's been waived under the CARES Act at this time.
Okay, that's helpful to know. One related question which has come up from a member, are there limits on what the EIDL loan can be spent on?
Yes, there are. This is Joan again. What you may use the EIDL loan for is providing paid sick leave to it's compensation related to the same extent as the PPP loan. So paid sick leave, maintaining your payroll, meeting increased costs, or it's broader, however, than the PPP. So rent payments, mortgage interest payments you can use. Again, you can't use both buckets of money to do the same thing. But let's say if you're just applying for an EIDL loan, you can use that for basically any of your operating business expenses that you need to cover, supplies, vendors, anything you need.
Okay, that's very helpful. There was an earlier question about whether you could use technology lease payments to get a PPP loan. And this is getting pretty granular, but it sounds like something which is less payroll related could be the subject of an EIDL loan, like technology lease payments.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that may or may not qualify under the PPP.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally it will.
Okay, all right. Woody, did you want to share something?
No, it's not going to qualify under the PPP loan because the PPP loan can only be used for rent, mortgage, or utilities in addition to your payroll cost. And so technology leasing, I think you'll have to have an EIDL loan to pay for the technology leasing, Max or Steve, unless you got a different reaction.
So it's safer to do the technology lease payments on an EIDL loan. Okay. Max or Steve, any follow-up comment on that before we move to another question?
This is Max. I agree on the PPP loan. It's very specific about how the funds can be used as far as technology leases or the interest on a mortgage. Okay. Okay.
one
Charlie.
follow-up question on, we're getting close to the end of our time, but is there a fixed interest rate for the PPP loan? What's the rate on the PPP loan?
1% for 2 years, and the first 6 months, all payments are deferred. So you don't have to pay anything for 6 months.
Okay. Is there a prepayment penalty if you decide to pay it early that would not be forgiven for the PPP loan?
There's no prepayment penalty.
Okay, great. All right, we've got a couple of other questions and we're almost out of time, so let's quickly go to these. All right. For EIDL, when you're asked to provide a schedule of liabilities, should we include all liabilities and let the SBA decide which qualifies for forgiveness?
Well, there is no forgiveness under the EIDL. I mean, there's the $10,000 present you get up front, but you've got to pay back the EIDL. It's,
Okay.
you can get a very long repayment term, but it is at 3.75%, and they're not going to forgive anything.
Okay. And here's an observation from someone on the call. I'm on the board of directors of a small nonprofit that was approved for both the PPP loan and the EIDL loan. The PPP loan went into place this morning, and the EIDL loan will be funded later this week. So that's good news. That was a dual approach, dual track taken, and both being expedited. Here's a bigger question. Maybe we end on this. So there's a political discussion of another stimulus package. Does anyone have a sense of whether the PPP loan amount might be increased for another period of time, assuming the economy does not rebound in 8 weeks? Any intel from anyone on the panel about that?
I'd share an opinion, I think. Certainly, I think that that the next package would include some increased funding for PPP, but I think that's more about bandwidth than it is about additional funding. I don't know if Congress is feeling their oats after passing major legislation in a week, but we might say that it's just a little bit early to tell whether another round would be needed. I mean, we're all concerned, of course, but I think that in the next stimulus package, there would probably be consideration of additional PPP funding, but only to fund more loans as opposed to continuing to fund borrowers. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you very much, Steve and Max. I think we've run out of time unless Corey tells us we have more time. I think our hour is up.
We don't have any more time, but I do want to say thank you to all of our panelists, and you, Charlie, did an awesome job moderating. And this is such an intense time where everybody's running 100 miles an hour. So to have each and every one of you on this line for an hour just means the world to our members. So thank you for doing that. I want to let everybody who participated on the call know that a survey will be sent out to participants, to gain your feedback in an official capacity. One of the things that I've done on just about all of our webinars is at this moment in time, I've asked everybody to jump over to the chat box and just give this a rating on a scale of 1 through 5. 5 being this was very valuable. 1 was a total waste of time. Just punching a number, and that in real time just gives us a sense on the value of this program. One of the main takeaways that I heard today is that time is of the essence. So I'm hopeful that this webinar provided some foundational knowledge so you can move forward with I will say a reasonable level of confidence if you're making a loan application, if you so choose to. I encourage you to visit our website, aiava.org. And again, that's aiava.org. We have a COVID-19 resource page. I think it's well organized, easy to navigate, lots of great FAQs from O'Hagan Meyer, other colleagues in our profession that have been helping us out. So do use that as a resource. It's a living page. We try to update it as we get new information. And so with that, I ask that you please be safe, enjoy your week. I hope we can continue to be of value to you as your association. I look forward to engaging in the next conversation. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Corey,
Corey.
and everyone for the opportunity, Steve and Max and Joan and Woody. And I hope everyone is safe.